University.
Let me make sure. So good morning. My name is Elizabeth Crawford, and I'm at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And I'm going to present today with a colleague who's actually online with us in Port Elizabeth, South Africa at Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University. And we happen to already have an existing partnership in South Africa through UNC Wilmington. We've been going for several years now in the fall, where students complete the last 5 weeks of their student teaching experience in South Africa, and they happen to be there right now. And so I've been working with Dr. Les Meiring. And Les, can you say hello?
Yes, hello.
Okay, great. And we're happy to be actually modeling how to collaborate virtually, since obviously it's a long distance for him to join us in person. And so what we'll do today is provide an overview of a technology-based collaboration between my students. I teach social studies methods at UNC Wilmington. It's in their last semester before student teaching. And Les teaches science methods at Nelson Metropolitan. So we wanted to work together to do an online collaboration between our two courses and have students actually work together in research teams using a platform called Ning that I'll show you in a moment, and to model that process that we hope they'll then take into their classroom. So we hope that by doing this in their methods courses, they'll be excited about doing this when they become teachers. And then we'll open up the last 10 minutes or so. We have Les online, and we can ask questions and share ideas with each other. So our online collaboration, again, is thinking of taking the existing content we were already teaching in our social studies classes and our science methods classes, and we thought about what we can do that would not be an add-on, that would actually meet the requirements of our courses as they were. And I love teaching science and social studies together, especially thinking about environmental issues. I think it's a perfect match. And so this is Les, and he's online with us. We'll actually video him in. It just will interfere with the connection right now, so we'll wait till the end. But his research interests are outcomes-based education and assessment, and he teaches, again, in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. And so it's actually kind of perfect because Wilmington, North Carolina, and Port Elizabeth, South Africa are coastal cities. And so that's a connection that, we wanted to focus on the big idea of people being more alike than different. So it's perfect because geographically, we could think about, well, what's it like living along the coast, and what kind of shared experiences might we have living along the coast? And our universities are somewhat similar, too. This is UNCW. We have about 12,000 students, and we're about 15 minutes from the Atlantic Ocean. And I teach predominantly Caucasian middle-class traditional students. And Les, could you speak a little bit about the students you teach at Port Elizabeth?
Yeah, my students are what we call foundation. That would be going to teach students from grade R, reception year, and the first two or three years of school. The class itself that we worked with were 60% white. They were all girls. We had about 30% colored, and we'll come back to that issue a little bit later, and 10% black African. So it wasn't as diverse a class as we would have liked. But it was a class that we had available to work with, and they were quite keen to help us or to associate with this collaboration at the time. Okay.
Great, thank you. So an overarching goal of the collaboration is to foster global competency, and in both our students. And this is a framework that I like. It's out of World Savvy. You might be familiar with them. And thinking about what knowledge, skills, behaviors, and values and attitudes that we want to foster to create globally minded teachers. And so the content part is already there in our methods courses in terms of me teaching about social studies concepts and Les teaching about science concepts. And we wanted to foster their research skills and their cross-cultural communication skills. And so that was one of the goals of the project, is to have them work together with an international peer to come up with solutions to environmental issues, and to actually weigh the different perspectives and weigh their biases, and we actually discovered lots of interesting assumptions that we had about each other. And then the last part is taking action. So what are you going to do with this? It's based on an inquiry cycle that I'll mention in just a moment. And other goals of the project were to have them think about how they can implement this in their future classrooms. And so I use ePals as a website, a program to model that I'll share in a minute. So they're actually doing this in the higher ed level that they could take to their K-12 classroom. So in terms of methodology, our research questions are here. What are American and South African pre-service teachers' perceptions of their respective countries and cultures before, during, and following an online collaborative research project? And then how do they think about the technology component using web-based synchronous and asynchronous tools for collaboration? And then does engagement in this kind of collaboration impact their perceptions of culture and global issues? So those are our research questions guiding our study. And this was in the spring semester of last year, of 2012. And I was teaching 2 different sections of a social studies methods course. They were fairly small, so combined I only had 29 students. And typically, elementary ed, I only had 3 males, and the rest were females, and they're predominantly Caucasian students. And then Les, could you speak about your students at Nelson Mandela?
I think just to add on what I said a little bit earlier, about 50% of them, English was not their first language. So they teach in English as the language of teaching and learning. About 50% didn't have English as their first language. And again, there were a large class of 76, which we divided into 2, and all female. Very seldom we have males being teaching pre-course at this level.
Thank you. And so his courses were obviously much larger, and we had tested this out the semester before in a more informal sense, and we found that it was too overwhelming to have 80 or 100 students in one website corresponding with each other. You couldn't follow all the discussions. So we thought, well, we need to put them in research teams and actually divide them up into teams of no more than 10 or so students, because otherwise they're following too many dialogues and it gets overwhelming a little bit. So what I did is I had tested out the Ning site about a year ago when I did a partnership with an Australian school, and it worked pretty well. And so I like it because it's a closed site and it's password protected, and so it's private, so they don't feel like anyone on the internet can see what they're writing about. And I'll share with you the website. This is it, and you can kind of structure it however you want. And they have different features. You can blog and have forums and photos and videos, etc. And we had a lot of fun just uploading all our pictures of our families and where we live. And then within the Ning, I created these research groups. So we had actually 7 groups, and it was completely randomized. As I sent an invitation to all the students to join, as they joined, I would just put them in group A, B, C, D. So it was completely random. And I wanted to balance how many American students and how many South African students were in the different groups. So that's sort of how we structured it for all their correspondences. And we conducted a pre-assessment before we started. We wanted to know, what did they think of their partnership country's culture and about also environmental issues later. So what do you know about South Africans and South African culture and geography? And then we also asked the South African students the same questions. And I'll share in a moment, we shared with each other what our perceptions are of each other, and that was really interesting. And after we did the pre-assessment, we put them in their research teams. For about 2 months, they conducted research through this inquiry cycle that I'll show you. And then at the end, we conducted a post-survey about what they learned and also what their recommendations are to improve this process and how they felt about it. So this is the ePal site you're probably familiar with. There are several others, iEarn and others, but ePals is the largest online free network for teachers K-12, and you can find a partner in another country, and there are translators on the website. And it's, again, a safe place, so parents don't worry about it being online without teachers being able to make sure that it's a safe place for them to correspond with a partner. So what I did is I taught my students about ePals, and then I structured our exchange just like this, using the Ning website. And if you go to epals.com, you'll see that they have projects, and they have everything a teacher needs already in place to conduct a correspondence. They have a calendar, so the teacher knows, okay, your first email would be about who we are. We introduce ourselves and we get to know each other. And then the next post is about our daily life, and then our environment and how we live, and then culture, etc. And so what I did is I took the same model and I adapted that for higher ed, so they would be kind of familiar with it. And this is what we came up with together. We had 5 strands within the research groups in Ning, and the first was just like EPALs, where they get to know each other. Describe your culture. What are the elements, important elements of my culture? How do we celebrate these elements? How do I describe myself? And then the second, and these are about 2 weeks apart. Give them about 2 weeks to kind of get to know each other and discuss these. And the second was focusing on geography. What is it like where I live? What kind of natural features are in Wilmington or in Port Elizabeth? And how does that affect how I live? And then post 3, 4, and 5 were the actual inquiry cycle that I'll discuss in a moment, where they actually started their research of environmental issues. But we wanted them to get to know each other first. So the first month or so, they were getting to know each other. So here are some interesting insights about their perceptions of their partnership country and culture. And this was done through the online survey tool at UNCW. And so I'll just read a couple of these. I clustered them by theme. So what were my students' perceptions of South Africans in South Africa? Interestingly worded, it is the most Americanized country in Africa. They knew a lot from movies. We asked them how they knew what they know, and they had watched some movies about South Africa. This was interesting. Some people assume that South Africans are dark-skinned, and this is false. There are actually many white South Africans. There were comments a lot about soccer being popular and languages, and they weren't quite sure what languages they spoke, but they knew they spoke other languages besides English. It's the richest country in Africa. Families are large and live in villages. So these were great opportunities to dispel some of these stereotypes. In terms of geography and the natural features, they talked about going on safari and the wild animals that are in South Africa that they had seen on TV or in movies, and what the weather's like, etc. In terms of history and then politics and current events, they knew about apartheid and Nelson Mandela, and a student said that it's is present day controlled by England, so that's a great opportunity to talk about that. There's a lot of poverty in South Africa. Poaching is a problem. Due to the AIDS epidemic, some people are supported by the government for medicine. The medicine that the government supplies can be used as an illegal drug. This hereby leads to some desperate individuals to contract the virus to be supplemented the drug so they can turn and sell them in the streets. So who knows where they got all this information, right? But it's a great conversation piece to start with. And then, Les, would you like to speak about what your students thought of our culture before we started the project?
Yeah. What was interesting, if we just want to take a minute to just glance your eye through them, and then I can just comment on 1 or 2 of them.
Sure. After we did this, I actually shared the results without using names, and they were like, wow, they think that about Americans. It was really interesting. We all got...
What happens a lot with this is certainly in... we used to get a lot of American films, and I think one can find that a lot of the sitcoms we see are American sitcoms.
Mm-hmm.
And so quite a lot of the ideas that they have are probably gleaned from, well, they say they're from the movies, etc. But quite a lot of sitcoms on TV is what we get. The Christianity as a religion is quite important. When we talked about that, there was this God Bless America that came up quite a lot, and that sort of struck them that this might be a lot of religion being involved. And I think the rest of it is probably got from the media.
And then here's some of the perceptions of history and current events. They knew about our debt.
Yeah. The one that I always found interesting was, I know that it is where our ancestors were enslaved, which was quite an interesting one that they came up with. Of course, 9/11 was all over our TVs at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea of the wars, etc., there's a lot of coverage in South Africa on that. We have a DSTV type thing, which there is a lot of CNN TV on that. So quite a lot of the stuff is probably gathered from the media and with its biases, etc.
Mm-hmm. So after we had conducted the pre-assessment, we started post 1, who we are and their research teams, and they shared different posts. This is just a typical one. about the link that they were for each of the groups. And this was one of my students who said that I thought about this question long and hard before I started writing. I feel that because everyone is diverse and different, every culture will reflect upon those differences, but in the same aspect share similarities. I believe that health, education, faith and religion, and security and love are common aspects of any culture. I feel that education, family, and love are important elements of my culture. In my culture, family is by far the most important element. I feel that family is the rock that we stand on. We are derived from our family, and in the end, and when everything changes and people leave, family will still be there. And she later said that it's actually hard to sit down and think about describing yourself. This other student in my class said that there are thousands of different types of culture in the United States. My personal culture, which I connect to my family, is defined by many things. Family, love, tradition, education, location, and religion are many of the factors that I associate with my culture. My family is the single most important thing in my life. We value traditions and have passed down from previous generations, such as celebrating birthdays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, wedding anniversaries, etc. And what was interesting through this, I could compile all these data and put them in Excel, and you wouldn't know who had written these responses, that we are more alike than we are different. And they shared a lot of photos. They actually really enjoyed this. As a side note, my students, because they were working together in two different courses combined on one website, they didn't know my students in the other sections. They actually commented that they loved getting to know each other better. So this had benefits for my classroom climate too. And then here are some perceptions of culture from the South African vantage point. And Les, can you see that well, or do you wish for me to read that?
No, I've got it. So from a South African perspective, our country can be summarized and is well known as the Rainbow Nation. After apartheid ended in 1994 and Nelson Mandela came into leadership, our country changed quite drastically. And this has impacted our country today to quite an extent. Our country was once divided by colour, but now it is culturally diverse. Nelson Mandela said this nicely after being elected. Each of us is intimately attached to the soil of this beautiful country, the Rainbow Nation at peace with itself and the world. This was powerful to be heard after the animosity of apartheid.
Great. And here's another.
Yeah. I think that an important aspect that describes the important aspects of my culture is the way that I was brought up. However, I also had the opportunity to discover who I am within my culture and how that affects those that are around me. If I'm on the right track, I believe that religion plays an important role in my culture and perhaps the way that I perceive things. I have certain morals and values and beliefs in terms of the way that one is meant to treat others with respect and so forth. Another important aspect is the variety of languages that are present in South Africa. It is in a way defines who we are and what a long way we have come in order to achieve this. Lastly, our views on diversity and democracy make us unique and rich in various aspects and spheres of life. Just to add to the different languages, we have 11 official languages, so
11.
There are quite a few different languages that we have. Okay, then I'll just go down to the bottom. There you can see the picture that we have there is of the bride. It seems to be a South African tradition. What describes me is the person that I have chosen to be and the path that I've chosen to take in life. I believe that there have been many people that have come and gone in my life and have helped me shape the person I have become. I also believe that circumstances does not define who I am, that it is entirely up to me. We all have the freedom to be who we want to be in this lifetime, and it is up to us to, if we are going to achieve that or not.
So really rich conversations that they had, which was personally helpful for them to just think about who they are and what shapes who they are. And here's the last one.
This one is interesting. I referred a little bit earlier to the use of how people categorize themselves or are categorized. Well, in South Africa, I form part of a racial group known as coloured. Unlike in the States, this is not a derogatory term. It is merely a racial classification. As a coloured person, we actually do not have important elements to our culture. I describe myself as a South African, one who is not only colourful but accepting of everyone, one who doesn't discriminate, one who loves this country and being who I am in it. I love this Rainbow Nation. I think we had we always had this debate in South Africa about, well, it's not so much anymore, but in the past it was always, are you an Afrikaner first and then a South African? and we had categorized ourselves in certain categories before we saw ourselves in South Africa. So this is maybe a kickback against that. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so this is what we had hoped, but they actually came out in their conversations that people are more alike than different. And so one student wrote to another South African student, "Your post was very enlightening to me, and it appears that South Africa is extremely culturally rich and values that culture highly. I really liked what you said about being colored and how that is not a derogatory word over there. I really wish it was the same way in America, but sadly, I feel like a lot of people in America cannot get over the past and continue to let the color of their skin dictate how they see themselves and others. Hopefully, Americans will one day get to where it sounds like South Africans already are." And she replied, "Well, don't get me wrong, there are many people in South Africa who also cannot get over issues of the past, but there are also so many positive, optimistic people who are making this country great. It's so funny reading about you because I am 27, also engaged, trying to plan a wedding, and also tutoring a little boy 4 days a week, then working part-time on the weekends at a beauty store to pay for my needs. Wow, what similarities." So these were beautiful conversations they were having. So about 2 weeks later, they learned about the geography of their respective locations and what it's like where they live and what the climate's like, how does where you live affect how you live, and what natural resources are here, etc. And so our students, I gave them the option to discuss where they're from originally, what they consider home, or it could be Wilmington, but most of my students are from North Carolina, and so they're from maybe a few hours away from Wilmington. And so they shared photos of their childhood and what happens where they grew up, and mainly rural country, settings in North Carolina. And then the students in South Africa did the same. And Les, do you want to mention about this? You had a good point about how they describe South Africa.
Yeah, I think, look, a lot of the way South Africa is portrayed is with the game parks, that's our tourism thing. Especially around the area where we live, we have the Addo Elephant Park, which is a large park, but we also have a lot of private game parks, which have all been created on rehabilitated farmland, etc. Now, there's a lot of issues around, should this be done or not be done, should we keep it as farmland, etc. But I think the big thing is they see us as having a lot of animals and things like that, but it's not that common. Okay.
So after we got to know one another, we then started the inquiry, and the inquiry was on paper and plastic bags, which corresponded with another project. And I wanted them to be exposed to this. Inquiry Cycles out of Australia by Kath Murdoch. There are 6 stages. It's on your handout if you're interested in it. She has a website with some sample models you can follow. But the process was students going through the inquiry cycle that they could then use in the classroom with real children, and that they would practice actually doing research, which was one of those global competency skills that I shared earlier. And so we wanted them to think about something that we see every day, which is grocery bags, single-use grocery bags. And at this time, as this was happening, a lot of cities around the world were banning plastic bags and imposing fees on plastic bags. And South Africa was one, because I'd watched a documentary and I learned about that. And then Wilmington has also been thinking about banning plastic bags. So it was kind of an issue that was happening in both places. But I also learned a lot that I was naive about in terms of paper bags in South Africa, that they don't really exist much. So that was something that I learned myself. But we wanted them to think about, well, what do you know about this issue with plastic? Why are some countries or in cities banning plastic bags? So students generated their wonderings, and here are just a few of them. I know that, and my students, it was really funny, most of them were very sure they knew. I know that plastic bags are really bad for the environment, and paper is a healthier choice. I know that animals, especially sea life, often mistake plastic bags for food. For instance, sea turtles thinking it's jellyfish, etc. And then also some believe that plastic can biodegrade, and some believed it couldn't, or it'd take a really long time. Some indicated that, well, paper isn't really an eco-friendly choice either. It's causing deforestation, and they tear, so plastic's better because it's more durable, and that most people use and prefer plastic bags now at the store. And then, Les, would you speak about what your students thought of the issue?
Yeah, well, they didn't see it as a big issue between paper and plastic, because we get plastic bags. Paper bags are not very common. Mm-hmm. If they are common, you would find them only in stores, shops that you would find in the Kruger National Park and places like that. I've never come across paper bags, or very seldom, anywhere else like that. But a normal store would be the plastic bags. We pay for our bags. We have for about the last 10 or 11 years been paying for the bags. But when we started to pay for the bags, we went from the thin plastic bags to a thick plastic bag. And I think there's a couple of pictures we'll see later on with school children carrying plastic bags. It's quite common that you use the plastic bag as a school bag. So you want the plastic bag, you want to recycle it. So the thicker bags they last longer as a school bag. And then there's a whole cottage industries that go around using plastic packets to in various things, making hats and things like that. So the comment at the bottom there, plastic is better than paper because paper is liable to break before plastic. What is looking at the sort of durability. So it was interesting the different way that our students view the plastic.
Great. And so they started their inquiries based on the questions they had. They then would target their research on the questions that they wanted to answer. And so a lot of my students wanted to know where North Carolina stands on the issue and why have some places put a ban on plastic bags or charged for them, how many plastic bags are used in a year or paper bags used, so just statistics on it, and what happens when you throw them out or what are the harmful effects of discarding them. And then, Les, could you speak about what your students had wanted to know?
The one that always struck me out, what is the point of having something you can't use more than one time? So the whole idea of it's not a one-use thing. It's a thing that we keep using. And one can see that how often these bags are used for various things after they've been used to remove the stuff from the supermarket.
And Les, your plastic bags are much thicker, right?
Yeah, we do have a thicker, I don't know the exact microns, but the microns did increase, almost double from what it was originally when they were free.
And I didn't mention this too, but when Les and I collaborated the semester before to plan this project in the fall before the spring, we shared each other's syllabi and our lectures to try to find something that would bridge across both social studies and science. And he teaches about sustainability, so this was an issue that we thought, they could research what plastic's made of in science and sustainability issues, and then I could address my content requirements in social studies. So they started doing research and gathering different articles and websites and books. We watched a documentary about plastic called Bag It, and we started looking at how we've been answering our research questions. And so one of my students said that I think it's very strange, the turn that my life has taken now, that I've learned so much about the plastic industry. I find myself being very conscious about plastic and the dangers involved with basically everything that is made with plastic. From my findings, I've now been able to answer my original question, what effect does plastic have on our environment? I felt kind of naive asking that question because I thought it was plainly obvious. I had no idea that plastic affected the oceans the way it does. I had originally thought of my investigation as an on-land investigation, but was soon drawn to the effect on the ocean. Another student said that I learned through my inquiry that plastic bags are worse for the environment because of the dangers they pose for wildlife, but that paper bags require far more fossil fuels to be transported from place to place. I've come to my own conclusion that reusable bags are better and that I will personally rely on my collection of reusable bags to carry my groceries. I can always wash the reusable bags to keep bacteria from congregating at the bottom and in the corners. So we talked about, well, why is plastic sometimes a good choice? People put meats in them or things to keep it separated from the other groceries. And Les, how did your students feel about their research?
It was just something they were doing. They had a little more insight in what was going on, but we never spent a lot of time discussing this at the end. I think this is one of the issues that we need to integrate these sort of things a little more carefully into the actual work that we're doing within the classes.
So can you?
Oh, sorry, I've got the other thing. On the other side, there are the pictures of the ubiquitous plastic bags as school bags. I think this whole lot, what I found when I spoke to the students afterwards about the recycling, how many of you actually do recycle? And a lot of the issues were that they don't recycle as much as they could because it wasn't convenient for them to do it. So I think they were more aware of it, but a couple of weeks later they were still not really recycling. So one has to look at this in a bigger way, and I think one of it is convenience, having recycling. Our university, for example, has one of its values as it has environmental values for looking after the environment. But we still struggle to find places where we can recycle stuff. So we need to include this in the whole big picture of the university in our lives, and I don't think that's happening to the extent. For example, when I asked them how do we recycle batteries, in the class not a single person had even considered that we should be recycling batteries. They just throw them in the bin. So there's quite a lot of work that has to be done on this sustainability and environmental stuff.
And really what came out of it is my students thought South Africans were more environmentally friendly, and South African students thought we were more environmentally friendly. That kind of came out in both conversations, which was interesting. So, as they say about the best laid plans, we had planned on doing a lot of Skyping sessions, and at the end having students in their research teams do a conference in our classes and present on their taking action steps. And that didn't happen. The time difference was challenging. We'll talk about some challenges, but I teach in the morning, and it was around midnight in South Africa, and it just couldn't happen. And the classrooms weren't set up that way, but they did talk about what they learned and how they can take action personally in their lives. So one of my students really got into it in terms of, we had a lot of class discussions in addition to what was happening on the NING, and seeing a lot of the videos that we watched really were compelling. And they said that having been very interested in finding about the paper versus plastic debate, I found myself watching, reading, and discussing with others the harmful effects in using the plastic materials. I have learned so many new things, even more than I wondered about before. It has become a topic of conversation amongst friends, family, as well as coworkers and grocery store attendants. I have learned that it isn't that most citizens don't care about the harmfulness of plastic bags. They are just unaware of the situation in itself. I've been downloading movies and other documents on the effects of the plastic bag from Netflix, and I've also found them quite interesting. And that's, to me, the greatest compliment of a student, when they take their time doing research outside of class, and that told me that they really did care about this. And I'd receive random emails, just like this one, unsolicited, from a student who said, longer email, and this part of it pertained to our project, that this evening I went shopping for supplies for my sister-in-law's baby shower. I was at Home Goods, and the sales clerk was wrapping my purchases. I told her that I could carry my items out instead of having them placed in a plastic bag. I then went to Walmart, and I knew that I'd be traveling this weekend. I wanted to purchase the package of water bottles, but I thought of everything that I'd seen in the Baggett video. I then thought of the glass that I had at home that I could fill instead. As I continued down the aisles and watched others check out with canned foods and single-use disposable packaging, I thought of what we viewed in your class. I just wanted to let you know that you've already made a monumental difference. By showing us the video and allowing us to discuss the ideas and educating us on the content, you have truly impacted the way we live our lives. Now, this may be just a handful of students, but I feel like that's a great testament to the success of them caring about the issue. And so even though we don't have the taking action results that we wanted, we still feel like there's a lot we learned from this. And we'll discuss now the challenges and opportunities to improve it when we want to keep doing this, but we think it's beneficial, and then open it up for discussion. So some of the challenges were student motivation. We did give a survey at the end asking them, what made you want to participate or not, and both groups, funny enough, South African students and my students, care so much about their grades that they all remarked on it's not worth very much of our grade, so it's not very much a motivating factor, which was funny for me. I didn't think of the South African students being so grade conscious, because ours are very grade conscious. Everyone wants an A. And so that was one of the challenges, is they weren't motivated because it wasn't worth very much. And then the access to technology was more of an issue in South Africa, and the classrooms not having the capabilities, and then students not being able to interact as well with the NING site. My students didn't seem to have any trouble, but I think they're on social networking a whole lot more, and are used to it. And the time difference was a huge constraint. We had planned to do so much together live, but couldn't do it because of the time difference. And then the work structures of when students are doing assignments in both classes, if they're real busy with other projects, they wouldn't think about the NING as much. And it's viewed as an add-on, and that's what a lot of these projects feel like to students is that I have to do all this and then I got to go on the Ning and do this. And this was a South African student said that I found myself stressed out and mostly occupied with other assignments. So that's a commonality with our students too. And Les and I have talked a lot about this since we've done this project. What kind of opportunities for improvement could we implement in the future? And that we think that students should choose the topic. You know, I chose the topic of the plastic bag because I'd seen a movie and I was personally interested, and I thought, well, that fits with his course with the sustainability, and South Africa has a ban on thin plastic bags, but really learning about this more, it didn't apply to a lot of the South African students, and they just weren't as interested. So we're thinking if we do this again, we'll have them actually choose together what they want to look into and what they want to research, which just is sort of obvious to me now. And then this needs to be incorporated within their academic requirements and not be viewed as an add-on, that we need to talk about between universities. We already have this partnership, but how can we do this more seamlessly where it doesn't seem like extra, you know, just like K-12 classrooms. And Les, do you want to say anything about these before I go to the next slide?
No, I think the time difference, you can just look at the time difference now. You guys at the start of the day, we're at the end of our day.
Yes.
We the late afternoon. So the time difference, and we have to find a way to take on that challenge.
Yeah, and, you know, Les and I Skyped this morning at 6 a.m. and it was, you know, afternoon, and they're getting ready for dinner, and we're constantly doing the math in our head, like when we can talk, you know, which is from Wilmington it was, and then from here is 10. Yeah, and so, and then when time changes in the U.S., it affects that by an hour, and so you always have to think about that. And then I've learned so much through this because I have my own biases and perceptions. And I used this the other day. Les and I were talking about the project, and he said, "When are you coming to South Africa?" And I said, "Oh, next fall." And he said, "Well, what do you mean by fall?" Because it's obviously spring now there. And I'm like, "Oh, I know that, you know," but it's a good reminder for us too. I do think some of their perceptions were dispelled about people in general. And so here are some examples. My students in the post-survey said, "As narrow-minded as this sounds, I've never thought of South African students when picturing different teachers around the world. I've always seen American teachers, the stereotypical intelligent Asian teacher, European teachers, which I picture exactly like American teachers, etc. But I never thought of students just like me living in South Africa." And another said, "First and foremost, it was eye-opening to read what the South African students thought of Americans. Some of the things they said were entertaining, while others were concerning. One thing that I remember that stood out to me was that Americans are lazy. I think after participating in this project, I would have to agree. The paper versus plastic issue really shined a light on how lazy we are with our trash." And lastly, another said, "I had such a wrong image in my head of what South African people were like. There was only one girl who regularly posted in the Ning group I was in, but just from hearing from her, I was able to see that my pre-assumptions were completely off and we were much more alike than we are different." And so we asked them, well, you know, how can we improve this? And both groups universally said we need to Skype in class and have live conversations. A South African student said having a real face-to-face conversation would have been really neat if the timing and availability to technology were able to work. Have synchronous discussion times even established by the professors, even outside if that had worked. And then the joint topic selection, a lot of them had mentioned about it. And then that thing about grades, a South African student said, there was no flaw in the design, but rather the execution, as people did not have a vested interest in it as the mark allocation was minimal. So the markers are the grades. And so they both are very grade conscious. And then my students specifically wanted to have more designated class time. I did spend some class time. I'd get the laptop carts and I'd give them time in class, but I think they didn't want to have to go home and do this. They just wanted this to be part of their 3-hour block time of class. And then this was a really great suggestion, the last one, about reformatting the guiding questions. Ning, I don't remember exactly how long a post can be, but I posted, and Les and I both posted, every time they posted, we posted. So we participated in the inquiry too, and I did my own research and he did. But it only allows a little block of text, and sometimes I'd have to do 3 posts. So they would, because I had written maybe 2 or 3 pages of my research, and students said, you know, it's really overwhelming when you log in and there are pages of text to read. I'd rather you have just short little questions and answers so we can actually talk to each other. And so I think even how I designed the questions was a flaw, because I had too many requirements of them, and I think it would have been more natural if we had just talked about things instead of it being so text kind of heavy. And that was a turnoff to them. And then what did your students think, Les? What kind of recommendations did they have?
Their technology thing was always for them a problem, although they do have access to technology on their campus. But they wanted to be reminded that they must take part in these discussions. And I think we need to set the thing up in such a way that they almost remind themselves. And again, it comes back to the choice of the project. The simplified access to the NEEM site, I think with our students, we have a system here on cell phone called Mixit, so they would interact with each other socially on Mixit far more than what they would do on Facebook and things like that. So maybe the whole idea of the NEEM and working on the NEEM was new to a large percentage of it.
I think so too, and so they had to go to the site, but then they also then had to log into their research group, so it was sort of like an extra step, and I think that kind of was a constraint for their participation too. And so we have about 15 minutes, and we thought we'd just have an open conversation about opportunities for collaboration between universities or any questions you have about our particular project. Yes, ma'am.
I probably missed this when you said
Mm-hmm.
is NEEM the email program?
No, and I'll show you. It's just it's a closed website. I paid $20 a month for it because there is a free version, but you can't group them in groups or cluster them with the free version. And I wanted to do that, so there are different options. It's just neem.com, and I think you can create your own name. So I called it Teaching Coast to Coast, and so that's our URL. So it's like a permanent URL. And they have to log in with a password. So I sent an invitation to all 100 or so students, and they had to then accept it and create an account. Mm-hmm.
They weren't charged for it because you already.
No, I was just paying $20 a month, yeah, to keep it going. And then, so we spent a while just kind of getting to know each other. And I found this really interesting. Les, I don't think I've asked you this, but I noticed, so there are 206 photos in the main slideshow. They're all from my students. None of the South African students posted. However, there was an open, let's see where they put it, in the blog. There was a forum where they could post whatever they wanted, not their research, but people would start just posting things that weren't part of the research. And I noticed all the South African students. So a South African student posted here, "What inspires you to be a teacher?" This is Mia. And all the responses were from mainly South African students. So I think when they got to choose the topic and go off and start talking to each other, they were talking amongst themselves about what makes them passionate about teaching. It was real interesting.
Yeah, they also had, we use a management system, Moodle. They also had where they could do that sort of thing on it. I think they just muddled the ideas up, quite possibly. But there were quite a few pictures from my students. I wonder where because I could pick up their pictures they were uploading.
I think they put them on their own page, but they didn't share them like in the public forum, because I went through all of these and I noticed they were all my students. But yeah, yours within their member pages had posted some photos. So
Member pages they put. Okay.
yeah, so this is like Amy and.
I didn't know there were two different places myself.
Oh, yeah. So there's another thing, right? Too many options on the site, I think. But I think, I think the concept was a good one, and I just think that we need to learn how to make this more seamless and integrated so it's not an add-on, to what they have to do. Yes, ma'am.
You said at the beginning that your students during student teaching then go to South Africa?
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. So, unless I could actually have you, can you activate your video and we can see each other? My colleague, Rich Huber, is the one who put us in touch, and he is there now with them during their final 5 weeks of student teaching. So he's my colleague in Wilmington and Port Elizabeth having dinner with Les right now. So, Rich, can you hear us? So there's my colleague from UNCW in South Africa. So he's supervising student teachers. Our requirement is in North Carolina is 10 weeks to be licensed, so you have to do 10 full weeks, and then we have 5 weeks, and we have programs every semester where they can go to different countries, and South Africa is one of them. So yes. And we've talked about that too, whether that's necessary or not. Can we go for 2 or 3? And because 5 weeks is a long time, especially for young parents we have on faculty to leave their children that long. But what's that? It's embedded in the students' fees. Mm-hmm. And South Africa is fairly inexpensive except the flight. I think that's what costs so much. But so I wanted to purposefully pick a place that we already have a partnership with to inspire students to then go teach abroad. I mean, that's kind of my motivation too. And so I needed to find a place where people spoke English, you know, so there wouldn't be that barrier. So this kind of worked perfectly for that. Yes, sir.
How many students actually travel during that 5 weeks?
So, Rich, do you have 5 students? Is that how many you have right now?
Would you say that again?
How many students are with you teaching?
How many students you have?
I have 5 students teaching in a township school. We purposely chose a township school for them to work in.
Mm-hmm.
This is our 3rd week of 5 weeks here.
Mm-hmm. Are you having a great time?
That's breaking up.
Oh, sorry.
That's breaking up a little bit. Can you take my video off?
Okay, that would be good. So,
Okay, we better now.
so we kind of hope that my students, before they go into internship, would then apply to be part of this program if that worked out too. Other questions? Hardly any. Rich, because Rich used to be our international program coordinator, what percentage of students, is it 1% or fewer, who go abroad at UNCW?
We have about 7% actually.
Oh,
So we
7%.
have a high percent. It's interesting that many of our minority students choose to go to South Africa.
Uh-huh.
40% of our students that go to South Africa are minorities. So we think that's an important part of our program.
Mm-hmm.
Do they stay in dorms or homestays?
Could you explain the housing arrangements?
Housing arrangements.
Housing arrangements, yeah, they stay near Nelson Mandela. We stay at bed and breakfast.
The bed and
And
breakfast.
then we are
Yeah.
transported every morning to a township school.
Mm-hmm. Could you please explain what a township school is?
Township school, how do I describe a township school? Very good question. It has to be considered a poor area of town. Typically, the students are lower socioeconomic groups. And so we chose to work with them purposely because of the need there and the importance of our students appreciating this group of folks.
Other questions?
Have you thought of doing it the other way around as well?
We have. And Rich, you're more familiar. The question was, have we thought of going abroad before the 10 weeks in the field during internship?
Oh, I meant.
Oh, sorry.
South African Preservice teachers coming and doing their student teaching here.
Oh, we do have, they don't do student teaching here, but they do come in and take courses. Rich, have we talked about having teachers from South Africa actually come and do student teaching in Wilmington?
We've talked about that, and everybody sitting around the table here is nodding, thinking that would be a good idea. We do have students from South Africa coming doing an internship, early field experience for 2 weeks each fall. And so that works really well in terms of our students being able to interact with South African students. So yes, there is an exchange, but we've not completed the student teaching exchange.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
How do you think about the viewpoint of
With them teaching, or? Yeah, Rich, could you explain what it's like for our students with the different languages in the schools and the township schools in South Africa and how they deal with that?
Different languages.
Oh, sure. English is the language of instruction at the township schools, even though they're English language learners. So we place our students at grades 4, 5, 6, and 7. Although it's interesting, they're learning as much from the R, or the kindergarten classes, because everything is done with song and dance. So even though, so it works really well to have them in the upper grades because it's in English. But again, the early elementary, kindergarten are really very fascinating for our students.
And how many children are in each class?
When I first started here in 2004, I had 70 students in my
70.
5th grade class. I think they've dropped the number to about 45, but there's no management problems because these kids want to learn.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
I can see the advantage for the American students going to South African
Yeah.
schools. What kind of feedback are you getting from the teachers and the students in those schools about their effectiveness?
Great. So, Rich, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi, can you, I have a question for Rich about, or for you, about how the teachers and children in South Africa perceive our students coming in and teaching. What is the benefit, or how do they view that?
It's mixed, frankly. Some of them see this as a great opportunity to learn. Others find it an excuse to be gone from the classroom. So it's mixed. They really don't have a clear concept, at least at township school, about what student teaching is all about. So we're spending lots of time helping them understand that we're there to observe and learn from them and not be substitute teachers. So that's probably our biggest challenge right now. The other challenge we're having now is that it's the end of the year, and so they're taking final exams and, of course, tests. The kids are ready to be done, the teachers are ready to be done. So we're doing lots of service projects, like after school, teaching them how to play various educational games. We're doing all kinds of Project Wild activities, things like that. So it's a challenge, but it's great fun.
Any other questions? Yes.
Have any of you, this is actually fascinating and exciting collaboration.
Thank you.
Have any of your students that participated in this expressed an interest in going to South Africa?
After they get back, or? Oh, in this project?
Yeah, these students.
Yes, I had. The question was, have I had any students after doing this project take an interest in going to South Africa? I did. Actually, Susan Smith, you have Susan Smith and Jenny Hawkins with you, right, Rich?
Jenny Hawkins had to drop out, but Susan Smith is here.
So yes, she was my student in this project, who then, and she's fascinating. She's former police officer, right, Rich?
Deputy sheriff.
Deputy sheriff, a female student about 30 years old, who left her fiance to go on this great adventure for 5 weeks and had never traveled like that, and I think was inspired in part from this project. It's a great way for them to learn about it before going. You know, it's a great educational tool too, I think, to actually, you know, talk to people before leaving. Any other questions? Do you have any recommendations for us about how to make this work better? We want to make this work. Like, we're committed to making this work. We got to figure out how. We both have to teach what we need to cover in our classes, and we don't want this to be extra work for students. It's not meaningful. So we want to find a way to make this work. You had a question or comment?
A comment. I was going to say, I think one of the things you identified will help, and that's having the students select the project. Because we work with a couple of European universities, and students like
yes.
what they're going to be doing, and it does make a difference.
Yes. Yeah, and you know, that wasn't obvious after they told me that, you know, but it was so hard. We spent months planning this before we did it. So we spent fall planning it, looking at he taught me a lot. I'd see his lectures, they were beautiful, and I'd learn how he teaches in South Africa and what we could do together. And I think I had to do my own background research about the topic. So it's sort of that whole piece of, we could pick something that I know nothing about, and I guess that would have to be okay too. You know, if they picked a topic I know nothing about, because I had to spend some time researching it to help guide their inquiries, you know, to spend class time on it with the lectures I have to do. So it's sort of a process, you know, to navigate all that. Yeah.
So you're always in this process of examining and making your practice a little better. What would you say are the top things that you learned as a result of this process as a teacher? In terms of teaching or just as a human being, I have a lot to learn about people around the world. You know, I had my own biases. Even picking the topic, I had no idea they didn't have paper bags in stores. I thought a paper bag, students in the form were like, what's a paper bag? In South Africa didn't really know what that was because as Les said, they don't see them. So I have my own biases about, well, they must see the same products we see in America and things like that. And that
I don't know. We have 9 weeks in my class because it's a 15-week semester. They're in the field for 3 weeks, and then there's some holidays, and the first day's lost, and the last day's lost a class. I have 9 weeks to teach geography, history, economics, and civics, K through 6. So I'm so stressed about how to do that in 2 hours and 45 minutes times 9, teach all of that, teach curriculum design with lesson planning, because they intern the next semester. So I'm trying to really find how to make this work without not covering the other things I have to cover, which is hard.
Could you make this the entire 9 weeks worth of work? And
Yeah.
Have,
Yes, good,
You know
good.
what I mean?
Yeah.
This is the class in a sense. And,
Oh, that's great.
And
Yeah.
especially if you have those posts or sections where they're doing culture, geography.
Yes.
sort of-
Yes, you're
you
right.
wanna learn you know what I mean?
Yes,
Like,
yes, that's great.
Having them do like geography projects.
Yes.
Research.
Yes.
On a specific country, but also are learning the skills of geographic inquiry. And
That's fantastic.
So to make it, and that kind of goes to some of that concern by both sets of students.
Yeah.
Both sets of students.
Yeah.
Buy-in.
Right. That's fantastic.
Towards the course, really.
And upstairs, I walked by a poster session. A high school teacher does all his teaching on Edmodo, and he was showing me how he does that. And I was thinking, oh, well, that may be a more user-friendly platform than Ning, because the students had so much trouble with, well, what form do I go in? And, so I may need to re-choose the tool, too, with what we use.
The only issue would be for the South African students if they really don't have that kind of access to technology.
Yes. Less said, though, they're more apt to use their phones in South Africa and not computers. So we need a tool, and Edmodo does have like an app that they could, he said they're more likely to post that way, so shorter responses using an app. So that's what I need to think about, making it more user-friendly for them, too. Did you have a question? Or?
I was just going to say, what we've done is we actually have our own website.
Oh, okay.
And
Mm-hmm.
so all our students just go, and it's independent of the university, but linked to it.
Right. Right.
You pay $60, $70 a year.
Okay.
But
I would love to
have
see your
that.
site.
So that has worked well.
Okay.
I'm going to go Ning, but I was going to pay $20 a month.
I know.
For you.
Yeah, and it's just a choice I made to make it happen. But I'd love to see your website. Maybe you could share your information. Mm-hmm. But Les, do you have anything? Do you want to put your video on and wave goodbye?
So come on now, there you are.
There you are. Okay. Well, thank you. It was fantastic. This was a great process. Have a good dinner.
Yeah, we will, thanks.
Okay. Bye, Rich. It was good to see you. They're clapping for you.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Enjoy lunch.
Thank you. Yeah, enjoy lunch.